Hello everybody, welcome to the 2021 Microdochium Patch Field Day. We've seen snow, we've seen sun, we've seen overcast. Well, we haven't seen a virtual field day yet for the Microdochium Patch. But here we are at the 2021 Microdochium Patch Field Day. I'm Clint Maddox, a research associate postdoc here at Oregon State University, and I'm going to be talking about an iron source trial that we've been working on now for 3 years. Now, Microdochium patch was brutal to this trial this year. We have Microdochium patch all over, and it's been a really good test for those treatments. Just to give you some background about why we're doing an iron source trial. Back in 2013, we did a trial looking at iron sulfate to suppress Microdochium patch on annual bluegrass putting greens. We used rates ranging from 1/4 pound up to 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet. At 2,000 pounds per 1,000 square feet, we were able to dramatically suppress Microdochium patch. And when we gave it a little bit of nitrogen, the turfgrass quality improved compared to no nitrogen at all. However, even with that nitrogen application, when we look upon those treatments, when we zoom in, we can see some bare soil, meaning that the turfgrass quality dramatically decreased because the iron sulfate was thinning out the annual bluegrass. And so, since that time, we've done quite a few trials trying to use iron sulfate to suppress Microdochium patch. We've looked at different application frequencies ranging from 2, 4, 6, and 8 weeks to try to see if we could extend our application frequency and improve turfgrass quality while still maintaining disease suppression. Unfortunately, when we look at the data, we find that only the 2-week application frequency is sufficient to suppress Microdochium patch. It still suppresses disease, but it still will thin out the turf because that's what 2 weeks application frequency does when you apply 2 pounds of iron sulfate per 1,000 square feet every 2 weeks. Another thing we looked at was looking at application carrier volume. And so our previous studies had focused on using 2 gallons per 1,000 square feet as our water carrier volume. In this particular study, we looked at 2.5, 5, 7.5, and 10 gallons per 1,000 square feet. This was kind of a surprise. We found that it didn't matter what your application carrier volume was. They all suppressed Microdochium patch equally. However, when we used digital image analysis, we found that the 7.5 and 10 gallons per 1,000 carrier volume were superior. They actually improved the turfgrass density compared to the lower carrier volumes. Unfortunately, even when you use 10 gallons per 1,000 carrier volume, you still end up with turfgrass that is too thin, in my opinion, for a golf course putting green. This could be still something that we could use on a golf course fairway, a tee, or an approach, but for a putting green, I think it's a little too risky. The next thing we looked at was trying to reduce the rates of iron sulfate by using them in combination with phosphorus acid. And so we looked at using 0, 1/4 pound, 1/2 pound, 1 pound, or 2 pounds of iron sulfate heptahydrate product per 1,000 square feet every 2 weeks, either with or without phosphorus acid. What we found is that the 1/2 pound or the 1 pound of iron sulfate heptahydrate product per 1,000 square feet every 2 weeks used in combination with phosphorus acid, and those would be the 2 treatments on top are with phosphorus acid compared to the 2 treatments on bottom without phosphorus acid, did a better job at suppressing Microdochium patch and also would improve turfgrass thinning. That is to say that the density was better compared when you applied 2 pounds of iron sulfate. So that was a good step. And of course, it still suppressed disease. The next thing we wanted to look at was to try to compare iron sulfate with chelated iron. Now we're getting to the crux of what is being presented today. Kind of in the background, just to give you some setup here, when we look at this particular slide, we have 3 sets of Petri dishes. On the left, we have Petri dishes that have been amended with chelated iron. In this particular instance, it was chelated iron in the form of EDTA. In the middle Petri dishes, we have iron sulfate heptahydrate. And on the right, we have magnesium sulfate. The magnesium sulfate is the equivalent amount of sulfate as would have been received with the iron sulfate treatment. And just for clarity, when you look at the magnesium sulfate plates, the Microdochium nivale little plug that was placed in the middle of those Petri dishes, that mycelium, or the fungus itself, has grown to the edge, meaning that the magnesium sulfate did not suppress the growth of the fungus at all. The middle plate that's been amended with iron sulfate has completely suppressed Microdochium nivale. It's done a great job at suppressing the fungus. On the left is the chelated iron that has suppressed Microdochium nivale, but not completely. So it has suppressed it, but just not all the way. So that gives us our trial that we're going to go to look at now. So in this particular trial, we had 11 treatments. We had a fungicide control. We had phosphorus acid, which is the active ingredient of phosphites. And then we had a not treated control. And then we're going to use different rates of iron sulfate compared to chelated iron. So these next 4 photos are all including iron sulfate. So starting on the left, we have 1/10 of a pound of iron applied as iron sulfate heptahydrate. Iron sulfate heptahydrate consists of 20% iron. So this rate of 1/10 of a pound of iron is actually a 1/2 a pound of iron sulfate. The next photo is the same rate, so 1/10 of a pound of iron is iron sulfate amended with phosphorus acid. The next photo is 2/10 of a pound of iron, that is to say 1 full pound of iron sulfate heptahydrate, and then that same rate amended with phosphorus acid. Now I'm going to show you the last 4 photos on the bottom row. And the last 4 photos on the bottom row are the exact same rate of iron, although these are being applied as chelated iron. So starting on the left, 1/10 of a pound of iron is chelated iron without phosphorus acid, then with phosphorus acid. Then 2/10 of a pound of iron is chelated iron without phosphorus acid, and then with phosphorus acid. So the data has shown that when we apply these products, the iron that's been applied in combination with phosphorus acid tends to do much better at suppressing Microdochium patch compared to without being applied with phosphorus acid. Phosphorus acid is indeed been shown to be very important for suppressing Microdochium patch when we go below the 2 pounds of iron sulfate heptahydrate per 1,000 square feet. In addition, the high rate of iron sulfate also suppresses disease consistently in this trial, even without the iron sulfate, but just not as well as with the phosphorus acid in overall terms. When we look at the data, and this is very interesting because now we have 3 years of data where we can look at the peak of disease for all 3 years. So we have the data now for 2019 from January, from 2020 where it was the worst in February, and it was also the worst in February this year in 2021. And these data were collected on 16th of February 2021, so not too much earlier than when our field day is occurring, so it's pretty relevant to what you would be seeing if you were at our field day today. So these red arrows demonstrate or indicate the treatments that are not significantly different from the control. And you will see that all of these red arrows are next to plots that do not have a combination of iron sulfate and phosphorus acid together. In fact, the DTPA, or the chelated iron, is always significantly different from is always in the same group as the not treated control, with one exception. So the chelated iron actually doesn't suppress disease very well at all when it's applied alone. And then when we shoot all the green arrows, all of those green arrows are not significantly different from a fungicide. Now this is where statistics gets a little bit squirmish, where you can actually be not significantly different from a fungicide control with literally 0.0% disease or 0.1% disease in 2021. And you can be statistically not different even with as much as maybe 9 or 10% disease. But from a practical point of view, something that a golf course superintendent may actually be interested in using, that would be a iron sulfate or a chelated iron in combination with phosphorus acid, in my opinion. These would not be considered acceptable for turfgrass quality for a putting green, but again, this may be an option for using iron sulfate and phosphorus acid to suppress Microdochium patch on areas maybe not as dear as a golf course putting green, perhaps as a tee, approach, or a fairway. So the trial's been quite interesting. We've been able to elucidate if there's a difference between iron sulfate and chelated iron. It does appear that iron sulfate alone does a better job than chelated iron alone. However, the combination, the phosphorus acid just does such a good job at suppressing Microdochium patch that it kind of doesn't really matter what iron source you use. Although the chelated iron doesn't thin out the turf as much as iron sulfate. But the price point may not be the same either. So I would encourage you, if you are looking into this, to look into some of our publications that we've done on iron sulfate. And we'll certainly be glad to answer any questions that you have at our upcoming question and answer forum. And you can also reach out to my personal email at clint.maddox@oregonstate.edu, or you can visit our website, beaverturf.com, and we're actually quite active on Twitter as well at OSU Beaver Turf. I hope that was useful, and I look forward to seeing you at the question and answer session.